Did you download it? I don't know. Let's check. Nope. Need to open up your email again. Yep, I don't think you downloaded it. It's on the desktop. All right, let's see the people. Okay, how's everyone doing? You tired? Woo-hoo. Okay, round two. I'm really excited about this one. Sorry, y'all, this is a repurposed presentation, so it's in Spanish and English. I was like, I'm not about to go through and delete all of the Spanish on here. So, oh, yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to tell y'all a little bit about my why as I get started on this piece of our work. So I was an educator in the classroom prior to coming to Children International. I'll hit 5 years this year, which like feels, man, I feel really good about it. I was like, 5 years. The only thing I've done that long is breathe in school. That's pretty much it. So I'm a veteran now, but I don't know, probably not. Which reminds me, I am going to ask in the room, like, what generations we have here, because I think that's really important when we talk about technology. But my why when I'm here, when I was a teacher in the classroom, you had two types of teachers, the ones who used technology and the ones who didn't. And I was the kind of teacher, when I saw the smart board, I was like, oh, I have to use that. That looks awesome. But most of my coworkers were like, nah, I just use it for PowerPoint. I don't need it for anything else. And so right before the pandemic, it was my first time out of the classroom. I started working at Children International, and I was very pregnant. And my baby was born. So the pandemic happened March 2020. My baby was born April of 2020. And I came back into work into a pandemic. And all of our programs that were in person were virtual, right? So my why, when I think about like do I get excited, was because as a teacher, I realized how important technology was in my classroom. When we had things like snow days, I realized that I didn't want to lose a day, especially in the state of Missouri. If you have a snow day, they put it at the end of the year. Now we know that students are done doing work in April. And so you put all these days in June, it's pointless. There's no learning that is happening after April. So what did I do on snow days? I said, oh, the show must go on. So I took my whole entire class, used the same digital tools that I was using in person, and I continued class. I gave them extra credit because how else am I supposed to get them to show up? And so we would continue having class, right? So when this pandemic happened while I was at Children International, I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do. I was so excited because I realized that this was going to be an opportunity for us to change the way that we operated with program implementation forever. Like I knew that there was not going to be any going back. So I'm going to take a minute. I would love if you can turn to the person next to you, turn and talk. Yeah, we're doing that. Turn to the person next to you and just share when the pandemic hit, wherever you were, if you were at the organization that you're representing now, or maybe you were somewhere else, how did you have to pivot? That's the question. All right, go ahead.
Children, library system feeds 6 services. It was a shit.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. Won't say it on a recorded mic, but if you're in a group, make sure the other person gets to share because you only have 20 seconds. Five seconds. All right. Go ahead and pivot to this direction. All right. So I heard some really cool things, which lends me to the next question is I'm just going to say a generation and just throw your hand up if you're from that generation. Do we have anyone from Gen Z in the room? How about my Riz? Huh? Okay, I just learned that phrase. Yeah, maybe y'all don't know it. I guess it hasn't made it to Kansas yet. Okay, any millennials? Okay. What's the next generation? I mean, millennials, we already got the best one. I'm just kidding. Gen X. They're like, don't forget about us. Middle child syndrome of Gen X. And then is it baby boomers? Is that the next one? You should be proud. All right. I mean, that's an amazing generation. I think so. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. All right. And then what's the generation before baby boomers? The silent, the greatest. If they're silent, they're not gonna even tell us if they are. Okay. Oh, there's someone. No, he said, don't call me out. There's a proverbs that says gray hairs are the crown jewels of wisdom. Okay. All right. So at Children International, many of you, I got to hear some of the stories of how the pivot felt. Some of you had expletives to describe it because it was hard, wasn't it? And the reality is it was hard for all of us. We were not ready. We were not prepared, which is really interesting in the international development space because many of us have had to deal with natural disasters, political protests, all of these very unpredictable situations that have paused our operations. But never before have we experienced something like that, where it was global. Everything had to stop for a moment. And so this was a huge deal. And so when I came back into the organization, we as an organization, we had to keep moving, you know? And what we did is we started a digital learning initiative. We put out guidelines in 2020 because we're like, we have to keep going. What are we going to do? We realized schools were stopping, but education needed to happen, right? We realized that people still needed to eat. We realized that there were a lot of like life skills that people now needed to learn that we didn't realize they probably always needed to learn, but they became even more apparent. Emotional well-being was extremely important during this time. And so what was really exciting for us as an organization is that we launched something called digital learning teams. And so across all of the countries where we work, we talked to staff and we're like, okay, so we know not everyone has the same amount of excitement about digital learning. And so we were like, but who is excited? And we gave them opportunities to lead their peers in using new technologies. The reason why this was important, specifically at the time I was working in the education space, and so some of the agencies where we work, they were starting to experiment with learning management systems, but they had never used one before. And so we were having programs that were virtual, and some of our people hadn't used learning management systems either. So students were showing up to places or on Zoom and they're like, we're on Google Classroom and I don't know what to do. So I know that you want to teach this other concept. but I have homework tonight and I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to access that homework. So in the digital learning teams that we started, they started seeing themselves as ambassadors to increase awareness about digital learning. So it wasn't just about, in the past, our computer programs, for example, were focused on hardware. Later on, we started thinking about software. There were some people who wanted to do website design and things like that. But now we're like, okay, we need to actually expand our understanding of what digital literacy is. It's not just about being safe on the internet, but how do we use things like a learning management system? So when I say learning management system, these are things like Blackboard, Canvas, Schoology, Google Classroom. Yes, those are all familiar. Okay, awesome. So what you see here on the screen, one of the agencies in the Philippines did the one that's right here, Learning for the Future. It was an awesome ad that they did for this huge summit that we put on for digital learning as an organization that I'll talk about in just a moment. And also, I guess I already talked about that. We had some learning questions because we said, okay, we can do this huge digital learning initiative and that'll be cool, but we should probably learn something and document it along the way. And so some of the questions that we were asking is we were asking some questions around staff capabilities, tools and platforms that I mentioned. What does quality and relevant content look like? Because we know there's a lot of crazy stuff on the internet and you can't believe it all. So a lot of people where we worked, they were like, okay, I want to do this virtual session, but I'm not sure if they're teaching the right thing and is it aligned to the national curriculum? And so we were asking questions around there. We were asking questions about effective engagement because there was a belief prior to the pandemic that an online course was not going to be as fun. And that if people didn't have video, they weren't paying attention. And some of us still believe that. But the reality is that you can be just as engaging virtually when you use the right tools, right? And then the final piece is monitoring and evaluation. We wanted to know how do we assess some of these other pieces virtually? Okay, so this learning management system, just real quick, does anyone work for an organization that uses a learning management system at all? Any way? Tell me more.
We have one, but we don't use it with our program participants. We use it in our headquarters. I knew you were going to ask me that. I think it's through ADP and LinkedIn Learning, both of those. So we have both of the LinkedIn Learning, a small group, right, Rob? Small group has access to LinkedIn Learning, but then we also have ADP courses.
That's fun. Okay, very cool. Okay. All right. So what we did is we went through this huge process because when it comes to learning management system, it is kind of rare to use it with participants. We used it for both. So we used it internally and externally, and we wanted to see, like, does it work better for one or the other? The process that we went to select one, truthfully, I love Canvas, but it was not good for the field. So I got vetoed very quickly by the people at the agencies. They're like, this is not going to work. There was not offline capabilities at the time. And so what we ended up using was something through Talent LMS, and we called it CI Learn. We had our own domain. And it was cool because we used it for internal capacity building. So how many times internally have you trained someone up? They've been with the organization for a while. They hold a lot of historical knowledge and then they leave. And then every time someone new comes, the first 1 or 2 weeks, they're spending the whole 2 weeks meeting with different people across the organization to figure out what's going on. But you do that with every single new person. And so for us as an organization, we will realize that was a waste of time and resources to say, oh, let me tell you about the history of CI. Let me tell you about the framework. Meet all the people in the different areas of programs, all the people in the different areas of growth and revenue, all these different areas. You can actually put that in a learning management system, and then they can do some things asynchronously on their own, and then they get to spend their time meeting with people, asking questions based on what they've already seen. Right? So we realized that that would be really helpful, but then agencies were also doing that process. So not just at headquarters, but in the agencies. And then they realized they could take all the programs that they were doing in person, do them virtually, And that was really helpful because when we got to 2022, 2023, they started asking new questions. And those questions were things like, how can I make sure what we teach in person is what needs to be taught in person? Because let me tell you something that I'm learning about Gen Z. Tell me if I'm wrong. If they're going to show up, they want to make sure that it's something they needed to show up for, right? They're like, if it's not useful in person, they'll say, I could have just watched that from my couch. Why did I have to be there? And so this was really good for us to realize as an organization. We wanted to make sure that our programs were something of value, that people wanted. Think about the things that people have to do to show up to some of these programs. Multiple buses, walking multiple miles, some dangerous situations that they're going through, oftentimes young children walking by themselves. So for us, it was really, really important to ensure that if they're going to come in person to a program, it's not something that they could have done online or on their own. The teacher, the facilitator is no longer the source of all knowledge when you have the world of information at your fingertips. So this is just some information about at the beginning of our pilot stage, how many agencies that we had participate, how many staff were trained on the LMS. We went through a whole training procedure. We eventually got it so that all 13 agencies had people trained to use the learning management system. This is some of the statistics that we were able to actually pull from the learning management system. So our MEL team really loved it because we didn't have to be like, hey, we need all this data. The learning management system pulled it for us. And we're like, hey, look. And then we had just a lot of learnings, but so through Talent LMS, the learning management system that we use, it told us what participation looked like in our specific trainings. We did a hybrid method. So we tested out just doing trainings virtually in Asia, Africa, and then in Latin America, we did them live with some asynchronous portions. As I mentioned earlier, and as we get closer to the end of time, so we had something called the Digital Learning Summit. This was a huge training initiative because we knew that a lot of people did not feel comfortable about going virtual. And so through this work, it was really cool that in 2021, we were able to train over 500 people from more than 15 countries. That was not the plan. I actually went on LinkedIn and went to different spaces and we were asking, hey, we want to have sessions about this. We're having this summit. Can you give a talk? And people were responding back, I'd like to participate. Like, okay, we're not getting speakers, but so we started increasing more and more participants because everyone needed that capacity building that happened through the summit. So this is just some details about that summit and people's satisfaction. If you heard of Net Promoter Score, I mentioned digital learning teams. So finally, the digital divide. That did play a significant role in the work that we did. And so I'm going to just show you just some information that we learned about what the digital divide looked like within the countries where we work in the agencies. So the first two agencies here, these are in the Philippines, Colombia, Delhi, India, Guatemala, Guayaquil. So we're talking about Ecuador, and then we have Jalisco, Mexico, Mexico, Lusaka in Zambia, Quito, Ecuador, Sahai in India, San Pedro Sula in Honduras, Santo Domingo in La República Dominicana, and the UALR is our partnership with Little Rock. So if you look at this is really interesting. If you look at the teal color, these are devices, and the magenta is connectivity. And for us, it might be a little bit easier to see if you split it up here with devices. So we asked, what is kind of the divide for our organization or the places where we work? And we noticed that there's a huge difference in who has devices in these agencies versus these agencies. When we looked at connectivity, however, it was a little different. A lot more agencies on this side versus the agencies on this side. So that told us a little bit more about where we needed to focus. And some agencies and the digital learning leads, they said, you know what, we're okay on devices, but we're really going to put our time and our effort to ensure connectivity. So we had Guatemala, for example, they did some radio work, which was really cool, where they would do lessons on the radio. But then they also had some partnerships with service providers so that they could put hotspots in some schools. And so there were a lot of different partnerships that agencies did in order to ensure better connectivity for our programs. So I put this back up here just to say that we're not done. Even though the pandemic feels over, one of my biggest fears personally was that we would just go back to business as usual, right? Like, okay, let's just do everything in person. That was great for a season. And so what we're doing as an organization, as we think about the work that we do across the lifespan, as we think about what does generational poverty look like, is we're trying to ensure that digital skills development is embedded in the work that we do. So we're asking questions like, what does it look like to enhance the digital skills of a 6-year-old versus a 14-year-old versus a 21-year-old? That's where we're still sitting. That's where I'm hoping in the round table, if you guys have answers to that question, I'm going to be taking a lot of notes. But we're still asking ourselves, how do we adjust based on the different life stages that children and youth are in? So that being said, I'm going to end there. And do we have time for questions? 2 questions? All right.